Hi everyone, I'm Cynthia Becht, Head of Archives and Special Collections. Thank you for joining us for our program, With Courage and Responsibility, We Look to the Future, Black Suffragist Voices. This is the 6th annual event in our Women's Voices series, a real favorite of mine, because it depends upon interdisciplinary collaboration, a wonderful weaving of intellectual exploration with dramatic creativity. For this year's focus, what else could it be but the women's suffrage movement through the lens of Black American suffragists? 2020 is the centennial anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, granting American women the right to vote. We are days away from a presidential election, and the Black Lives Matter movement has charged us all to understand and remember what goals we have yet to reach in our country and why. Although this program was originally scheduled for last March, it feels even more timely today. Following the series custom, we will feature a blending of undergraduate actors bringing to life the voices of 4 extraordinary women in performances that share the perspectives they left behind for us through their own words, combined with an expert scholar's insights. To make this interwoven program a reality, it took a community, so several thank yous are in order. Our warmest thanks go to Deans Chris Brancolini and Bryant Alexander for supporting the program for so many years, the Departments of Theater Arts and African American Studies, and my library colleagues who have masterminded the behind-the-scenes aspects of the program. We especially thank Professor Daphnie Sicre, Department of Theater Arts, for assembling and directing tonight's talented actors. Her essential and enthusiastic partnership is a key ingredient that makes this program possible. Now, it's my honor to introduce tonight's wonderful scholar, Jennifer Williams, who selected the voices we will be hearing tonight and who will provide each with historical context. Jennifer Williams is an assistant professor of African American Studies at Loyola Marymount University. She is a Philadelphia native and attended Temple University for her graduate work. Her research interests are Black women's history, Afrofuturism, and Black nerd culture. To this brief biography, I will add that Jennifer is a most gracious, flexible, and thoughtful partner for Women's Voices. The focus and scheduling of our program kept evolving, and Jennifer led us to an amazing group of voices. It has been such a joy to partner with her. I was the lucky one who got to provide Professor Williams with research assistance, reading passages and discovering the words of these 4 profoundly important women who experienced and shaped our American history. I have already learned a lot from Jennifer Williams, and I can tell you we're in for a special hour. As noted in our chat, please keep your questions until after the performances are over, and then please use the Q&A icon to send questions to any or all of the participants. Thank you, and without further ado, welcome to Women's Voices, and here is Professor Jennifer Williams.
Thank you. Hi, I'm going to share my screen. Greetings all. Oops. Sorry. Pardon for the technical difficulties. Okay. In these times, when the burning awareness of African American suffering at the hands of the state forces us to act, we must look to the past and remember the long history of activists fighting to survive and thrive amidst harsh conditions. Only by speaking their truth, African American women such as Maria Stewart in the 1930s, Fannie Lou Hamer in the 1960s, and Breeze Newsom in the 2010s put themselves in harm's way and transformed the consciousness of the nation. At this event, we must recognize the determination and work of Black women who fought for the right to vote, women such as Sojourner Truth, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, Anna Julia Cooper, and Mary Church Terrell. They all asserted their humanity of their Black womanhood while chastising the American government for declaring itself a land of liberty, while subjugating African Americans with racial laws and unchecked social norms. In listening to the speeches of these Black women, we want to thank them for the lives that we have today. And we honor their legacy by continuing to fight for injustice whenever and wherever we encountered it. Hi. I would like to introduce our first speaker. And we will start with my personal favorite because she is my Afrofuturist forebearer, Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth was born into captivity in 1797. And yes, she literally and bravely walked away from her captors in 1826. She fought for the return for her son from kidnappers and won her case. She delivered many speeches about abolition and women's rights over her lifetime. In the 1850s, she narrated her story to Olive Gilbert, which became a best-selling biography. The money from this work allowed her to buy a house and gain financial independence for herself and her family. She recruited Black soldiers from the Civil War, and she worked as a nurse in Washington, D.C. To help African Americans to escape through a war-torn South. She spoke adamantly that Black people should leave the South and the North and head west to have the ability to write their own destiny. Her speech, Ain't I a Woman, is a foundational text for feminism, womanism, and intersectionality.
Well, children, where there's so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the woman at the North, white men will be in a fix pretty soon. But what's all this here talking about? That man over there says women should be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Look at me. Look at my arm. I have plowed and planted and gathered in the barns, and no man could heed me. And ain't I a woman? I could work as much and eat as much as a man when I could get it, and bear the lash as well. And ain't I a woman? I have borne 13 children, and seen most all sold off to slavery. And as I cried out with my mother's grief, none but Jesus heard me. And ain't I a woman? Then they talk about this thing in the head. What's that they call it? That's it, honey. What's that got to do with women's rights or Negroes' rights? If my cup only holds but a pint, and yours holds a whole quart, wouldn't you be mean to not let me have my little half measure full? Then that little man in black, there, says that women shouldn't have as much rights as men, 'cause Christ wasn't a woman. Where does your Christ come from? Where did your Christ come from? From God and a woman. Man ain't had nothing to do with him. If the first woman God ever made was strong enough to turn the world upside down all alone, then these women together should be able to get it right set up again. Now they is asking to do it. The men better let them. Obliged to you for hearing me. And now old Sojourner ain't got nothing more to say.
We would gladly like to thank Sojourner Truth for her words. If you could, in your home, snap or do a clap. Thank you. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was a writer. She was born free in Maryland and began writing at an early age. In the 1850s, along with abolitionist William Still, she helped Africans escape to Canada through the Underground Railroad. She began speaking out enslavement during that time. She published poems and short stories in the 1850s, and after the Civil War, she was part of the leadership of many prominent African-American organizations. She, with Harriet Tubman, Ida B. Wells, Mary Church Terrell, and others, founded the National Association of Colored Women, which promoted the social welfare of Black women and children for the benefit of the community as a whole.
I feel I am something of a novice upon this platform. Born of a race whose inheritance has been outrage and wrong, most of my life have been spent in battling against those wrongs, but I do not feel as keenly as the others that I have these rights in common with other women, which are now demanded. About 2 years ago, I stood within the shadow of my home. A great sorrow had fallen upon my life. My husband had died suddenly, leaving me a widow with 4 children. I tried to keep them together, but my husband died in debt. And before he'd been in his grave 3 months, the administrator came and swept the very milk rocks and wash tubs from my hands. I was a farmer's wife and made butter for the Columbus market, but what could I do when they had all but washed away? Had I died instead of my husband, how different the result would have been. By this time, he would have had another wife, it is likely, and no administrator would have come into his house, broken up his home, sold his bed, and taken away his very means of support. I do not believe that giving women the ballot box is immediately going to cure all ills of life. I do not believe that white women are just dewdrops exhaled from the skies. I do think that, like men, they can be put into 3 classes: the good, the bad, and the indifferent. The good will vote according to their convictions and principles. The bad, as dictated by prejudice and malice, and the indifferent would vote on the stronger side of the question, with the winning party. You white women speak here rights, I speak of wrongs. I, as a colored woman, had in this country an education which made me feel as if I were in a situation of Ishmael. My hand against every man's and every man's hand against me. One day I took my seat in the car. The conductor came to me and said to take another seat. I just screamed murder. The man said that if I was Black, I ought to behave myself. But I knew that if he was white, he was not behaving himself. Are there not wrongs to be righted? In this country, we have a woman who goes by the name of Moses, not by lying about it, but by acting it out. A woman who has gone down into the Egypts of slavery and brought out hundreds of our people into liberty. The last time I saw that woman, her hands were swollen. That woman who was brave enough and secretive enough to act as a scout for the American Army had her hands swollen from a brutal conflict with the conductor who undertook to eject her from her seat. That woman who has won recognition from the army and every Black man in the land is excluded from every thoroughfare of travel. Talk of giving women the ballot box? Go on. It is a normal school and the white women of America need it. While there still exists this brutal element of society that tramples on the feeble and treads down on the weak, I tell you that if there is any class of people that need to be lifted out of their airy nothings and selfishness, it is the white women of America.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Frances Ellen Watkins, for your words. Anna Julia Cooper was a scholar of the Black female experience. She too was born into slavery in 1858, and after the death of her husband, she decided to pursue a college education. She earned her bachelor's and master's at Oberlin in mathematics, and after many years, she went back to her school for a PhD at the Sorbonne in Paris for her thesis, The Attitude of France on the Question of Slavery between 1789 and 1848. Cooper's most significant book, A Voice from the South, is a philosophical and sociological narrative about the souls of Black women, citing how they are voiceless to the American political project and vulnerable to sexual exploitation. But she claims that the position of Black women will define the future trajectory of the nation.
Now, I think if I could crystallize the sentiments of my constituency and deliver it as a message to this Congress of women, it would be something like this. Let women's claims be as broad in the concrete as in the abstract. We take our stand on the solidarity of humanity, the oneness of life, and the unnaturalness and injustice of all special favoritism, whether of sex, race, country, or condition. If one link of the chain be broken, the chain is broken. A bridge is no stronger than its weakest part, and a cause is no worthier than its weakest element. Least of all, can women's cause afford to decry the weak? We want, then as tollers, to go to our homes from this Congress, demanding an entrance not through a gateway for ourselves, our race, our sex, or our sect, but through a grand highway for humanity. The colored women feels that women's cause is one and universal, and that not to the image of God, whether in Parian or Ebony, is scared and inviolable, that not to race, color, sex, and condition are seen as the accidents and not the substance of life, that not to the universal title of humanity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is conceded to be inalienable for all. Not till then are women lessons taught and women causes won. Not the white woman's, nor the Black woman's, nor the red woman's, but the cause of every man and every woman who has rights silently under a mighty throne. Women's wrongs are thus indissolubly linked to all undefeated woe, and the acquirements of her rights will mean the final triumph of all right over might, the supremacy of moral forces of reason and justice, and the love and the government of all the nations of earth.
Thank you, Anna Julia Cooper, for your words. Yes. Mary Eliza Church Terrell also graduated from Ufalon College and worked as a teacher at M Street Colored High School in Washington, D.C. She was thrust into activism because her friend, Thomas Moss, was lynched because he had the audacity to run a successful business against white business owners. Terrell focused on racial uplift, and like Anna Jewel Cooper, she focused on Black women's social welfare. She was the president of the National Association for Colored Women and one of the founding members of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, as we know today, is the NAACP. In the 1950s, when she was in her 80s, she fought against segregation at a restaurant in DC and won one of the first cases declaring segregation was unconstitutional in 1953.
This semi-centennial of the National American Women's Suffrage Association is a double jubilee. Rejoicing as I do not only in the prospective enfranchisement of my race, but the emancipation of my sex. When Ernestine Rose, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucy Stone, and Susan B. Anthony began that agitation by which colleges were opened to women and the numerous reforms inaugurated for the amelioration of their condition along all lines, their sisters who groaned in bondage had little reason to hope that these blessings would ever brighten their crushed and blighted lives. For during those days of oppression and despair, colored women were not only refused admittance to institutions of learning, but the law of the states in which the majority lived made it a crime to teach them to read. Not only could they possess no property, but even their bodies were not their own. Nothing, in short, that could degrade or brutalize the womanhood of their race was lacking in that system from which colored women had little hope of escape. So gloomy were their prospects, so fatal the laws, so pernicious the customs, only 50 years ago. But from the day their fetters were broken and their minds released from the darkness of ignorance, to which for more than 200 years they had been doomed, from the day they could stand erect in the dignity of womanhood, no longer bond, but free, till tonight, colored women have forged steadily ahead in the acquisition of knowledge and in the cultivation of those virtues which make for good. Questions affecting our legal status as a race are constantly agitated by our women. In Louisiana and Tennessee, colored women have several times petitioned legislatures of their respective states to repeal the obnoxious Jim Crow car laws. Nor will any stone be left unturned until this iniquitous and unjust enactment against respectable American citizens be forever wiped from the statutes of the South. Against the barbarous convict lease system of Georgia, of which Negroes, especially the female prisoners, are the principal victims, colored women are waging a ceaseless war. In business, colored women have had signal success. There is in Alabama a large million and cotton business belonging to and controlled entirely by a colored woman who has sometimes as many as 75 men in her employ. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, the principal ice plant of the city is owned and managed by one of our women. In the professions, we have dentists and doctors whose practice is lucrative and large. Ever since the publication in 1773 of a book entitled Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral by Phyllis Wheatley, Negro servant of Mr. John Wheatley of Boston, colored women have had from time to time given abundant evidence of literary ability. In sculpture, we are represented upon a woman whose chisel Italy has set her seal of approval. In painting by Bergen's pupil, whose work was exhibited in the last Paris Salon, and in music by young women holding diplomas from the first conservatories in the land. And so, lifting as we climb, onward and upward we go, struggling and striving, and hoping that the buds and blossoms of our desires will burst into glorious fruition ere long. With courage born of success achieved in the past, with a keen sense of responsibility, which we shall continue to assume, we look forward to a future large with promise and hope, seeking no favors because of our color, nor patronage because of our needs. We knock at the bar of justice, asking an equal chance.
Thank you so much, Mary Eliza Church Terrell, for your words. So inspiring. So we have now heard the four voices, and I invite all the panelists, including the actors, our esteemed faculty expert, and the director, Daphnie Sicre, to please join us so that we may answer any questions you may have in Q&A. I hope these are voices that are both familiar and hopefully some new to all of you. It's just to remind everyone that Q&A is one of the buttons at the bottom of your screen. You may ask a question of any of the actors, of the process, of the voices, the history. Were these people who were new to you? So we have a question from the audience. Thank you. What do you think would the woman you represent would say about the upcoming election? Shall we start with Sojourner?
That's a great question. It's actually weird doing this today because I did just vote this morning. So I think Sojourner would say, I think she would have a lot to say about the current climate of feminism and the current president's views on feminism, our new judges, our new Supreme Court judges' views on feminism, and I think she would really encourage people to vote, especially now. I think this is one of the more important elections. I think that's what she would think as well. So, yeah.
Wonderful. Frances Ellen?
I think that Frances would have honestly a lot to say about what's being righted rather than what's just being thrown up in the air and kind of talked about, but nothing's actually being concrete and fixed. And then I think with the ethics of how things are going about, she would want things to go in the right way in freedom for everyone, but also focusing on what is wrong, not just what is already fixed. Also trying to bring in what is wrong already and then trying to fix it further.
Thank you. Anna Julia?
Anna would definitely say that it's time to bring everybody together, that it's not just one voice that matters, that it's everyone's voice that matters.
Thank you. And Mary Eliza?
Like everybody else, I think Mary Eliza would want everybody to vote, but also like have an educated vote. She was very much a champion of women's education, especially like women of color. And I think she would have a lot to say about the Supreme Court justice that was just voted in last night. I think she would not be very excited for that, but I think that she would want everybody to like have an educated vote.
Professor Williams, do you have any follow-up comments to that?
I think all the actors actually like covered most of the ground, but definitely the same critical lens that they had then, they would probably have now about what are these politicians doing for the African-American community? What are they doing for African-American women? And they should, and even today, stop ignoring this population.
Thank you. I have another question for you from the audience, Professor Williams. Why do you think some of these women, such as Sojourner Truth, are more well-known than others?
So a mixture of things, of course. Most of it to be that a lot of these women were lost, so to speak, through the annals of history, just by their speeches weren't necessarily translated down into academia. So a lot of like what we know about people goes to like education. But then the second note, and this is going to be a critique of African-American studies, when that became kind of a discipline as well as history in general, the voices that tend to be uplifted at that time were men, and then maybe white women, and then Black men. And so we get more about Du Bois, earlier people like that. And then we come to like Black women, but then even Black women weren't necessarily upheld, especially Black women whose writings were not necessarily in very publicly accessible archives. Ironically, Sojourner Truth, the reason why she kind of like survives actually comes from her own work, that she in the late 1800s was a publicist of herself, let's say. And so her image that we kind of all kind of have a general understanding was she was selling that everywhere she went. And her biography that was written, she was selling that everywhere she went. So her story, her kind of like who she was, became a very like national understanding, both in the white and Black communities. Whereas these other women, while they have knowledge and were kind of understood, they probably were understood a little bit more locally and within the African American community, but only kind of got revitalized in the 1970s with the Black women's studies becoming very relevant in the academy, as well as those scholars pushing these voices forward. And so that's kind of the work today, that we have to keep pushing their voices forward despite certain parts of the system kind of making Black women's voices invisible. Sorry for the long answer.
No, that was amazing. I have another question from the audience. This is for all the actors, and we'll go in reverse order this time, starting with Mary Eliza. For the actors, what does it mean to you to be able to portray these amazing women?
For me, this was a big learning experience because I didn't really know anything about Mary Eliza Church Terrell. But now that I've been able to learn a lot more about her, I've just really become appreciative of everything that she's done for the African American community and for women as well.
Anna Julia?
As for the same, I never knew about Anna Julia Cooper before this project. So it was interesting to learn more about her achievements and, you know, her being one of the first African American women to get her doctor's degree. So it's definitely nice to like live on her legacy and to speak more about her so that people can know about what she's done for this community.
Fabulous. Frances Ellen?
For me, it was also really great because I think growing up, I've never heard of Frances Ellen. And when, we're in, high school or whatnot, and we're learning about like history, it's not something that's really mentioned. We learned about Rosa Parks, we learned about Sojourner Truth, but you don't really stop to consider history is like a choice. So, a lot of times it's what the administration thinks that we should learn. So I really, really enjoyed it because it was a new experience and learning about someone who I didn't know. And then I got that realization of at least there was, and there still is, such a wild world of like African Americans that were more than, and not saying this is a bad thing, but like Rosa Parks, like more variety.
And with a long history, absolutely. And Sojourner?
I am really honored to be playing Sojourner Truth and to give light and give a voice to someone so important in Black history, especially right now when it's so timely. And it's been a learning experience for me as well. I didn't know majority of these things, even if I knew the name. So a lot of the stuff, like, it's not just Mary Eliza Church, Terrell, not just everyone, but including Sojourner Truth. A lot of these things aren't taught in school. This is a special study. You have to go off and learn about these things. So I really appreciate this opportunity, learning experience, and being able to educate more people around me, especially now when it's more potent than ever.
Thank you. We have a wonderful comment from Dean Brian Alexander and a question. Firstly, he says, congratulations for the brilliance, beauty, and bounty of the performers and the powerful Black women they honor in such a glorious way today and every day. To Jennifer Williams and Daphnie Sicre, I raise my hands and lift my soul in your presence and persistence in celebrating the souls of Black folks. Snap, applause, amen. That was wonderful to read. And the question, of course, is how did you prepare to enter the words and world histories of these Black women relative to Black women peoples today? I think that could be for any of the actors as well as the director.
I'll go first. So we started off with lots of text work, lots and lots of text work, because I didn't know pretty much anything about Sojourner Truth other than the basic facts. So lots of text work to begin. And I tried to really get into her experiences. I kind of tried to think about imagery as it relates to each line she's saying, you know, picturing the her arms, how she plowed and planted, the men she's looking at and people she's talking to in the space, the 13 children she had. Just thinking about all of that and the weight these words carry. And then as that relates to Black women today, I kind of just taking my personal experience as a Black woman in 2020, especially with all the trauma we've experienced and all the great things we've experienced too lately for Black women, all the newest accomplishments and things worldwide. So just taking what I personally know and then what I see every day and kind of combining my experience with Sojourner's experience together to try to make her words even heavier than they are.
Anyone else?
Okay, I'll go. Yeah, for me also, it was also a lot of text work at first. I had never heard of Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, so it was definitely learning first before even preparing to memorize the piece. I wanted to get my mindset in her mindset, basically, and then basically also connecting myself with the feeling of loss, which is something I don't really like to talk about or really think about. But when I was thinking about how she lost her husband and then her kids eventually as well, simply because she couldn't afford it, basically, that definitely went into the preparation and getting the overall performance together.
Thank you. Mary Eliza or Anna Julia?
I can go.
I
I had a sorry.
Let's start with Mary Eliza.
Okay. I also had a lot of text work, just kind of like understanding the context of when she wrote this and like what the world was like for her. It was really interesting because like I said, I'd never heard of Mary Eliza Church Terrell, but like learning more about her and just like how she was saying that like there's so much more that needs to be done, but she also wanted to give praise to a lot of the work that had been done. I thought that that was really important just to like look up and to figure that out and like to see like what the world was like for her.
Great. And Anna Julia?
I would definitely say a lot of research, seeing how she carried herself, what her message was and what she was trying to get out to the people. And definitely history repeats itself. So putting myself in a position of today's time and relating it back to that.
Fantastic. A question from John Jackson. And again, for our student performers, you are the ones we want to hear from. Which lines were particularly salient for you? Which lines did you spend the most time thinking about as you prepared? Sojourner?
Oh wow, you put me on the spot so quick. I got to think about it. Let's see. I really like the closing. The closing was like a slap in the face for me when she says, and now they is asking to do it. The men better let them. That kind of, I feel like that line just floated across the stadium that she's speaking at. And I just feel like it's a very huge, she's kind of looking at them like, so I really like that one, or those two lines rather together.
That's great. And as the earliest voice, that's quite something to say. Okay, Frances Ellen.
Yeah, so I think the line that really sealed it for me was also my last line. I think when I said that you think that what she's talking about is not what you think she's talking about, and she goes on and just says it. The people that are just activating for us so much, but they're not really taking into consideration what really goes on and what really needs to be corrected are the people that think that it's all, smiles and happiness when that's not really the dirt of it. So I think the last line when she says, "It is the white women of America," that just puts a bow over the whole Frances Ellen Watkins Harper as a person for me. So.
Yeah, I think she had some of the most powerful critiques to state of everyone. Okay, Anna Julia.
I would say the line that is that the colored woman feels that women's cause is one and universal, because in that part of the speech, she really lays down the law and that says that, until everyone matters, nothing else matters. So I feel like that line in 4 was really important in my speech.
Incredible. Mary Eliza.
I really love the line that says, "We knock at the bar of justice, asking an equal chance," because we spend the first part of the speech like praising Susan B. Anthony and Lucy Stone and like all these women that we already know a lot about because they did so much for women's rights. But then you go on and you learn more about like a woman in like Halifax, Nova Scotia, who's a colored woman who's like doing so much, and so she's just asking for an equal chance and asking for like equal rights as well as the white woman that she is also praising, and I think that's really powerful.
And she provides so many examples, so much evidence of inspiring women. So that is incredible. We have a question. I think this one's going to be for Professor Williams from Dean Chris Brancolini. It's inspiring to hear the words of lesser known Black women activists. How were they chosen?
I guess just a mixture of it kind of seemed like most public speaking women of those time period were saying things about suffrage. However, what kinds of things they were saying about suffrage may have depended on their station. And so I wanted to make sure that there was kind of a wide variety of different classes of Black women, people who lived enslavement, people who were maybe a little bit, they got to a different point in their lives, as well as different parts of the United States, just to give different perspective, as well as like how were people in New York thinking about suffrage and Black womanhood versus someone from, the South didn't go too far, but maybe Baltimore thought about those things. And just generally wanted to also give different biting remarks about the nation. And so like you see all these different things, like some of them are like against white women specifically, challenging that notion, challenging the state itself, or even just challenging system more broadly. And so wanting to have each kind of actor present that kind of reality that was happening, as well as the span of time. We have the earliest speech coming from like the 1850s, and the latest speech coming from like 1900 so far. And also saying the length of Black women fighting for the right to vote, or at least having their words heard, was long and important.
In a follow-up question, John wonders, were there any other voices or women that you considered for this program? Who else would you want to add to this if we did this again? And I have to say that John posed this question for Jennifer, Daphnie, and myself, but it really is Jennifer's call as the expert scholar in the room. And I want to know the answer now too.
Let me say the people who I made in the beginning, now I'm not doing people's names right. I actually would put the 1960s women in it. And I know they're not necessarily fighting for suffrage directly, but they are fighting for the right to vote. So I kind of wish I had some of the later women, such as, why am I blanking on names that I just said 2 seconds ago? But those speakers, yes, the women of the 1960s and 70s, and also speaking there. Thanks,
Sounds
Daphne.
like we need a program part 2.
I feel the same way. I feel like this, like, especially like as a director, Jennifer, one of the things that I was doing is like, not only I was referencing this notion of historically, and again, a lot of the actors have said this already, like history repeats itself, and Black women have been like notoriously in the forefront saying, this is what we need, this is what we want. And so to see a chronological sort of progression of some rights, but not all rights, and then continuously Black women being in the forefront and being like, you know, I think you're absolutely right. As soon as I heard that question, I was like, ooh, 50s, 60s, 70s. Oh my God, there could be so many like installments of this sort of growth that all stem in the same thing. And it's women asking for the exact same thing from different perspectives. And so, yes, Jennifer, let's do this again.
I'm already there for this. This is amazing. And thank you, John, for that fantastic question. A question specifically for Daphne now. Can you talk a little bit more about the direction you gave the performers, especially in the context of performing historical figures?
I mean, the first thing I said to, once I assigned all the actors to who they were going to be portraying, the first thing I said to them was like, you need to do your research. As a director, I want to, and in the next meeting, what was beautiful is that every single one of these incredible actors had done the research. So they're sitting in the room, and Jennifer was in the first meeting for almost everyone. Also, Jennifer was there to contextualize and add anything else, but everyone had done their research. And so, and I say this to actors, whether it's a historical or not, like you've got to do your research. And these 4 actors did their research prior to coming into our first rehearsal. And Jennifer was there to also be able to have this conversation historically, to talk about these women and contextualize them. And so we got to give it up to these 4 incredible women who, first rehearsal, they've done their homework. And as a director, I couldn't ask for more from an actor. Like that to me is like fantastic. And then it just makes things so much easier to come in the room and to have your actor be like, well, Mary Eliza, blah, 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 or Sojourner, actually, blah, 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 Anna Julia, blah, 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 right? Because then the actor has looked at this historical knowledge. And we also went online and we looked at their pictures and, you know, their bios and everything. And it was, I can't say it enough or praise these actors enough. Like they brought in the homework, they did the research, they did the work. And so then it's so much easier to memorize the lines because you can contextualize them. And then what we also did is we really paralleled what these women were saying to what is happening right now in this current moment. And so many of the things that these women are saying right now are like, they're right there. It's the exact same thing. And that's a little disheartening and it's a little upsetting, because you look at sort of this timeline, but it really places it in the sense, in the realm of like, well, this is why people are fed up and this is why people are protesting right now, because you have had women, Black women, talking about these issues for over 100+ years. You know, not 10 years, not 5 years, 100+ years. And if you add on to that, the women whose records we don't have, who were enslaved, who would tell oral histories and oral stories, we're literally talking about hundreds of years of women really being in the forefront, Black women being in the forefront and being like, and fighting for justice. And so when people are complaining about why people are protesting and looting and blah, 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 I was like, maybe they need to look at history. Maybe they need to look at some of the speeches that have been given to understand the complexities of like, enough is enough is enough.
Daphne, you perfectly set up the next question, which is now directed toward the actors. And that is from Karen Williams, who asks, actors, what would you say to young people today, since it sounds like you've had this conversation with your director, regarding the importance of getting a better understanding of what each of your roles stood for and how to apply that in our world today? Sojourner, do you mind me calling on you again?
I'm like still reading the question again. Okay, so what would I say to young people about my character?
Yes, and what she stands for, what she stood for, and how your understanding of her would apply to what you might tell a young person today.
Okay. I would definitely tell young people to get more involved in your own rights. I mean, it's your life, you know. Black people didn't fight this hard for you to not go out and vote, amongst other things, you know. I think that's the most important thing. And I don't just mean the bigger elections, I mean the local elections, because that's what people forget about. It's really the small government stuff you need to be involved in. Researching your candidates, getting other people involved. Because if you think about our history, if you think about the past, let's just go to the 60s. I mean, everyone was getting involved in fighting voter suppression and the Black Panther movement. Everyone was out. You know what I'm saying? If you were Black, or if you were a friend, if you were an ally, you were out in the streets marching. So we're starting to see that again. This kind of a second civil rights movement washing here. I would definitely encourage young people to go out and fight for yourself, fight for, and people who aren't Black, you know, who aren't Black women, fight for fight for people who don't look like you, even, you know, fight for what is right, honestly. And I think we're seeing a lot of that more anyway. So I just tell people to get out.
Great. Frances Ellen, how would you explain what Frances Ellen had to say to a young person, and how what she has to say and what she still is telling us applies to our world today?
So yeah, I would explain to a younger person basically that she's fighting for rights, but there are going to be people who might not care as much as you do, and that's really because it doesn't affect them and they don't see it. But you and, African Americans, we have a long history. Simply, we have a very long history. And we've gotten this far, and we still need to keep fighting. And if you don't do it, like, no one will, basically. So I think she would tell them to stand up for what's right, see what's wrong. And for those who think differently or have different opinions, you can enlighten them, that's okay. But stand up for what you believe in, and make sure to fight with your other allies.
That's great. Anna Julia, what would you tell a young person?
I would definitely say speak up. Don't stay quiet. This generation definitely has a voice. And so it's definitely important for us to speak up, and not to only fight for your own race and your own culture, but everyone around you.
And Mary Eliza, what does your words say to a young person today? How do they apply?
I think Mary Eliza would say, like everybody said, to vote and to be heard and make sure your voice is part of the conversation. But also, I would say, like, do your research, really educate yourself. And like, there are so many other women who we don't talk about, like Mary Eliza. And like, there are so many people that have done so much for African Americans, for people just to like get the right to even like be in like a college classroom, which is a lot what Mary Eliza Church of Terrell was saying. And so I think like she's saying celebrate the small successes, but also like keep researching, keep doing the work, keep educating yourself.
Fantastic. The Q&A is filled with praise and so many wonderful words, and people who are going to be sharing this, the recording of your performances with so many people. It's remarkable. We have 5 minutes left to our program, so I am skimming for questions. And I see one that is back to the actors, asking if you have other Black women in our contemporary times that you would like to portray. Is there someone whom you would like to give voice to?
I'll go first. I was thinking, I saw this question earlier. I was thinking about what I was gonna say as far as what contemporary means. I'm thinking, does this mean post 1950s? Does this mean, so I'll give two. I'll give two. That's one that's a little older, one that's closer. So I'm gonna say Angela Davis. We already talked about her. She's great. I've been saying this for a long time. Um, and then for a little more contemporary, I'm gonna say one of the women who founded Black Lives Matter, because there were three of them. So I think that's also really important, and that story is gonna get told very soon. So I would love to play one of them.
Amazing. Thank you, Sojourner.
I would have to say another important figure in contemporary times would be Michelle Obama, just because she was the first Black woman in the White House. So definitely someone I look up to.
Great. Thank you. Any other thoughts? Any other women who have come to your mind?
I would say Hattie McDaniel. She was the first African American woman to win an Academy Award. And I think that that's just like so special. And I love like acting and stuff like that. So I think it'd be really cool to be able to portray her.
Thank you.
Hi. So I would definitely say also Michelle Obama. I remember when Obama got elected into office and just how big that was for everyone around in my life. At that time, I was young. So at the time, I had a whole bunch of family in my life. So I'd had a whole bunch of African Americans in my life. And I just remember my parents, it was something that was just a different feeling, a different vibe. So with Michelle Obama being in the White House and running two terms, I think I would just love to play her now.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think we have time for one more question for any of the actors, and that is from the research that you conducted for your characters, for the people that became alive again for us today. What did you learn from your characters that you may have applied to your own personal life? Did any of their beliefs influence you and the way you think and feel like you will be going forward with?
I'll go first again. Definitely, because Sojourner Truth was fearless, and in learning about her, and I remember the first rehearsal we had with Daphne, and then she said that she just walked away from slavery, and I'm like, how does that work? I don't know, but that's pretty cool to me. So my takeaway from her is go after what you want, because she definitely went after what she wanted. And now I'm learning even further. You know, she's promoting herself on the streets. That's something I should be doing with myself. You know what I mean? Do whatever you got to do to get what you want. That's definitely what she did. So that's pretty inspiring to me.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more takeaway.
I would say that connect with other women, no matter what their culture is. We're all one, no matter what our skin complexion is or where we come from. So connect with other women or just people in general, and that you can do anything that you want. Just put your mind to it.
Thank you. And I think we've reached the end of our time. Thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, actors. Thank you, Daphne, and thank you, Jennifer. As usual, Women's Voices is so inspiring, and I personally will be taking these names with me through the rest of my life, and I know that many other people were impacted too. Thank you so much.